how immature and insane is it for me to only be showing what my body looks like when I have so much more to offer? Because I've always loved psychology and, looking into human development and reading the self-help books. I just never really talked about it. And so it kind of got to a point where I was like, I'm doing not only me such a disservice because people don't actually know my heart, but I'm also doing my entire audience a disservice, because there could be someone hanging on by a thread, like threatening their own life because they feel alone in the world, that my story could help remedy. And so it kind of got to a point where it wasn't just a nice to do or, oh, this would be cool to share my story. It got to a point where I was like, this is a necessity, because people do need to hear this, because one day all of our stories differently will be someone else's survival guide. And when we take that seriously, I think that also places the responsibility and the gratitude with the content that we start to produce.
Let's link up with Krista on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hey, FYX listeners, welcome back to our latest episode of the FYX podcast. I'm your host, Krista Huber. I have one incredible guest for you today. This is one of the longer podcast episodes that I've recorded in the last few months, even in the last year, I would say, having spent a ton of time being committed to my solo episodes, making sure that I was showing up and giving you guys a whole lot of me, myself, and I really got into a groove of turning the mic on, speaking for like 30 to 45 minutes. That it's been a hot minute since I really dove in and had a guest who was open, had a lot to say. And that is today's guest for this episode, my dear friend, an amazing coach, somebody that I look up to, somebody who inspires me. And that's my girl, Tansey. Chelsea is going to take you on a journey through her life experience that has been quite a ride, and really using her story to show how she's evolved as a person, but then as a result, how that's evolved her relationships, where she is in life, the decisions she makes, her ability to take risks, and then her ability to be a heart-led leader. Chelsea is the founder of an amazing coaching business called Wholehearted. The name really, to me, says it all. And what she really does is help business owners, whether you happen to be a coach or whether you're somebody who is in any kind of leadership position, as she describes it, help you be better connected to yourself, because that connection point is showing up in your business. Anywhere you feel stuck in business, anywhere you feel stuck in your relationship with money, your relationship with other people, it's going to influence every other area of your life, because all of it's connected. And why is all of it connected? Because you are the common denominator in every single scenario. It's that quote, everywhere you go, there you are. And Chelsea just has a really beautiful perspective that makes so much sense once you actually hear about her upbringing, everything she experienced in life. But more importantly, this episode is a reminder that you got two choices in your life. You can choose to be a victim. You can choose to say that the system failed you, that something was broken, that, oh, of course, this and this would happen to me because of this and this thing. You could do that. Or you could just show up. And you can show up in a way that isn't saying that you need to be hard and you need to be intense and you have to just be balls to the wall and go, 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 and be in this super hyper masculine energy. You can show up and still be soft and still feel that flow and still feel that creativity. And I think Chelsea's just the type of person who shows you that two things can be true at the same time. She really embodies the duality of being a human, of having both the masculine and feminine, of being able to have the tough conversation, but also be direct and be really clear. And as you'll hear both of us use this word a number of times in this episode, being very convicted in who you are. That then shows up in the way you promote your business online. And frankly, I shouldn't even use the word promote, because for the two of us, for the type of work that we do, for the type of people that we support, for what we believe as business owners, we are both on the same page, in the sense that when you are connected to yourself, when you know exactly who you are, operating through the world does feel a little bit easier. That shows up on your fat loss journey. That shows up in how consistent you are in going to the gym and meal prepping. It shows up in the way you conduct yourself inside of relationships. It shows up in your ability or lack thereof to communicate with other people and to just be you. So I'm excited for the feedback on this episode. I know I say every time we have incredible guests, and I really am grateful for that. We are getting up there with being close to 5 years into this entire show, getting close to hitting the 200 episode mark. I will have a special solo episode when we get there in just a few weeks. But I am just really proud of the ability to use this podcast as a platform to highlight people like Chelsea and the work that she's doing. So make sure you go follow her. All of her info is down in the show notes. And with that, let's welcome Chelsea Tansey to the FYX podcast. Chelsea, welcome to the FYX podcast. I just love the fact that we were coming in hot and we were like, hey, do you want a podcast? Yeah, let's do it tomorrow. Cool. Like for how busy both of us are, I think I have to start and mention that to the listener because it is very rare that things come together like this. And I tend to record my podcast content like 2 to 3 weeks in advance minimum. And this was just spur of the moment. So it was meant to be. So welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's so funny even getting you in my community a couple of weeks ago. I think we booked it like a month in advance. So that just goes to say what kind of people we are. Type A is in the GCal month in advance.
Yes.
Yesterday we were like, fuck it, we ball.
Yeah, let's do it. Like you had this perfect piece of content that I was like, oh, we need to podcast on this. And I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while. And it's kind of perfect timing because I'm getting really close to 200 episodes. And I want to do like a reflection on the journey because I tend to do that at like every like 50, 100, 150 kind of milestone mark. And it'll be 200 episodes in almost 5 years, which is like so crazy to be able to say that I've been podcasting for that long. So it's a good time based on your work and your journey that you're coming into the conversation. But I don't want to make it about me because this episode is going to be about your experience. So with that said, like I do with every guest before we kick off the show and get into the deep stuff, into the nitty gritty, what's your go-to coffee order? What are you sipping on in the morning? I know that you're on a little bit of a gut health journey right now. So if you're not drinking coffee, that's okay too.
Right now I can't drink coffee, but if I do go to a coffee shop, it's usually a spearmint tea or peppermint tea. What I will say with that though, when I'm not off it, chai tea latte every time.
Nice.
Every time.
Very nice. I got to admit, I've never been a chai girly. I just couldn't get into it. I don't know why. I really like tea, but it's taken me about the last like 12 to 18 months of also working on some gut health protocols to like originally I forced myself to drink it. And now I actually do look forward to it. Back in September, I had no caffeine for a month. And like, you know, the way I talk about coffee, that was like really, really hard to do. Really hard.
It's like taking a squirrel, like taking Hammy away from his cookies.
Yeah, legit. I was like, oh my gosh. But shout out to my nutritionist that I work with, Sally. She turned me on to this really good dandelion root tea. It's called Tea Chino. Do you know it?
No.
Oh my God. Oh, you got to get it. Everybody on the show, I've never shared this before. So everyone on the who's listening, like whenever we bring up tea, I don't know why I haven't said this, but I haven't. It's this dandelion root tea. And usually you hear that and you're like, this is going to taste like dirt. Like that's immediately what you think of. But they have these flavors that it's caffeine free, acid free. Like it's technically not coffee, but the flavors make you think that it is. So I kid you not, there's literally like these two flavors. One of them is like a mocha and the other is this like caramel nut. You add some almond milk to it, you would think you're drinking coffee. It's just like not as like thick, but it really does taste like coffee. So I drink it even at night because there's no caffeine. And it's just like a nice little nightcap.
I wrote that down so fast because I hear all the benefits of dandelion root tea and you drink it and you're like, what is that? And so I haven't been back since. Once and done.
Yeah, because
so I'll try this one.
I normally do like the mint tea too, like any kind of like peppermint, like that's really good for your digestive health, but so is the dandelion root. So she turned me on to this. You can get it on Amazon. They have like a variety pack of flavors, but like the mocha, I'll send you the caramel. I think it's just caramel nut. I'll send you that one, but that's my favorite one. It's good.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah. So there you go. All right. Huge departure. We're going to go into the next question that I'm very excited for you to answer because it's right up your alley, just in terms of the way I'm going to ask this. And you can give me your resume. You can tell me what type of coach you are, what type of certifications you have, all the people that you've worked with, all those things. But I don't really care about that because I want to know who is Chelsea at her core. And follow up to that, Why should we care about what you have to say? There's so many podcasts we can listen to. What would be the value of somebody staying on this one for the rest of this conversation?
You were right. This is such a good one.
I told
this
you.
is made for me. If I was to describe who I was without using any of my titles, I like to think of myself as a 3-year-old toddler in a 94-year-old's mind. Like, I have the energy of like Hammy from Over the Hedge, the excitement of the toddler. I want to pick up all the caterpillars on the street and dance. And also, let's sit down and talk about all the musings of life at the same time. There's no in between. Where,
so
you know how some people are like super deep, some people are like, it's not that deep. How can you be both at the same time where you're like beep boop and also let's talk about the meaning of life? That there's just no in between. And I think that honestly, that going into this podcast is why I think it's so beneficial. I think we both have such good energy and there's so much depth that comes with it where we make learning fun. It's like one of those childhood television shows of watching Blue's Clues, but for an adult, let's teach you your ABCs, but make it fucking hilarious while you do it. And I think that's why everyone should stay on this because I know this is going to be a really good one.
I love that. I think that's so great. And also, I want to give you the space to get into whatever you're comfortable sharing, but knowing like your personal journey of where you even were at like age 14, 15, 16, I'm sure that you could not have envisioned even being able to describe yourself the way that you just did if you were to go back and talk to that, you know, that time of your life and that version of yourself, which is really amazing. And what it also made me think of as soon as you said it with like the comparisons of like, hey, it's not that deep, but also it can be really serious. I feel like talking to you is like what it is feels like to go down like the journey of like any kind of like adaptogens or mushrooms or like anything like that, because that is like the actual experience. Like if somebody was going to describe like, and I'm not talking like, I'm not saying that you have to be on like a balls to the wall trip doing mushrooms. I genuinely mean like, even if you took like lion's mane, right? And I've taken those adaptogens before. And it gives you this feeling of being like super focused and really dialed in, and you can do a lot of deep work. But at the same time, you also have this way where you're just like recognizing. And I think it's because if you think about like ashwagandha, cordyceps, like all those other things, they calm your nervous system. So it's this ability to have two things be true at the same time that you're like, I can be locked in and I can be super serious, but I also recognize that like life isn't actually that serious either. And that's just like a feeling I can't capture in any other way than to say like, if anybody out there has ever done shrooms, like that's kind of what it's like.
I'm just the human embodiment of a microdose.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's really what microdosing feels like. Like I think it's so, you know, I haven't really had anybody on the show to talk about this, but my podcast editor is huge into that world and like has dove into it himself. So I'm sure when he's listening to this edit, he's going to be like, we got to talk about this more. But I really feel like that's the way to describe it. So if anybody wants to know what that experience is like and you're afraid to dabble, just go look at Chelsea's content and you'll get an understanding of exactly what it is. That's good.
Love that.
So if you would like to start there, I think it would be helpful just to kind of set everybody up in talking through your journey and really helping us understand the type of coaching that you do, having transitioned from what would be a more classic online fitness coach into this embodiment and leadership coach who really does work with the coaching population as well as, you know, people in executive positions, et cetera, to be able to help them actually get clear on who they are. That's my interpretation of the work that you do. But I think before we talk about like that professional transition, I think it would be cool to kind of set us up for your life transitions of the story that you have, because to set the scene for everybody else, we met through a group that was a business coaching group that Chelsea's currently in. I was in for 2 years, changed both of our lives tremendously. And the first time we met, Chelsea had just joined the community and we were in a setting with like 25 other people. So I didn't really get a chance to talk to you super long one-on-one. And it wasn't until like a year later, I'm like scrolling through Instagram one night, minding my own business. And I see this whole story from you about how you ran away from home, navigated going to college, like we're dealing with so many things with substances. And I was just like, oh my, I had no idea. Like I was speechless. And like to understand that that's where you were versus where you are now, to me is really important context. So I'd love for you to set that up in your own words as it relates to this type of coach that you now are today at 26.
I appreciate you so much for giving me the space because I always laugh at most people look at me and they're like, there's this 26-year-old young white quote unquote life coach. What the fuck does she know about anything? Right. And then,
Yeah, we
getting
know
into
that
my
meme,
story.
but you're like the antithesis of the meme when we actually know what happened in
Right.
real life. Yeah.
I know right now God laughed when he made me who I am as the poster child and then gave me the background. He's like, this is gonna be the funniest little meme for people. Because, like you said, I think for me, I had to grow up. I think this is also why I value that childlike nature and being super fun and playful, is because I, growing up, didn't really get my childhood, right? In a way, it was kind of stripped from me. And I learned very early on that I had to grow up really fast. I had two stepsisters, a whole family that I'm not going to say I essentially had to take care of, but I had to make my own, right? I was in charge of
Yeah.
all of the chores. It's kind of like Cinderella-esque, if you will, where it was, okay, I have the stepmom, the two stepsisters, and my dad, usually out of town, not there, not present. And so I was often left to my own devices of having to fend for myself very much on the emotional scale and taking on a lot of household duties that obviously everyone parents different. I'm never gonna judge how people parent, but I don't think I should have been doing at the ages 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm a child. And so, I think through a lot of that, it wasn't just the fact I did chores, but there was very clearly, walking around and there was literally plates, dude, of cocaine with a credit card and a straw just sitting out. I'm like, first of all, that's concerning that my parents are doing that. Second of all, I could have done it. It's just there. It's out in the open. And
Oh
it
my
was just,
gosh.
it was so many crazy things of like holes punched in walls. Like there's little things that I think I didn't necessarily know at the time shouldn't be normal that I just took on as my normal. And the deeper I got into, now my horizon is getting bigger. Now I'm not a child anymore. I start growing up and developing more cognitive awareness on what the fuck is going on. Where they had a grow up in the backyard growing vegetables, they said, but they're bringing in all this parsley and putting it in the freezer. And I was like, why do we need so much parsley? And then these things start clicking, and it's like you go to school and where with the childlike wonder, if I had known it back then, I probably would have said something. But growing up, it brought so much shame onto me because for me, if people knew where I came from, I feel like then I look like a deadbeat.
Sure.
So then it just kind of started to like go on, and it kind of reached this breaking point where I hid dating a guy for 2 years from my parents. I had a secondary phone. I'd hid it, like I had this whole system, like, yeah, I'd like sneak out of my house, all this stuff. Cause I'm like, I ain't letting my parents, like these strict ass people, hold me back. And there was obviously a lot of nuance and abuse and things like that that was going on. But for me, I was like, if there's a will, there's a way. That's one thing that I learned at a very young age of if I want something, I'm going to find a way to make it happen. Yeah. And at this time, unfortunately, it was a dropout boyfriend, skater boy, as it usually is. But they ended up finding out that I was dating him, took my phone, took my laptop, took everything away for a month. And they called my job to try to make me quit so that I had to stay home all the spring break and think about what I did. Luckily, I was able to keep my job, but it was nearing the end of that where it was a month of them putting me in grounding that I finally just had enough because they're like, nope, we're just going to keep you grounded. I'm like, but I did my time. You guys said a month. I did a month. Let me go. And they just weren't doing it. And that was the day that I just like a flip switched in me because I've had lists up until that point of being like, what do I need to bring when I run away from home? Like I was planning it. I was plotting it. What do I need to pack in my bag? You see all these little jokes of like this bag tied to a stick in cartoons. I was like, that's not going to cut it for me. Like we need to make sure that we are prepared because once I leave, I ain't never coming back. And so essentially that's what happened was fleeting in the moment. I was just like, it's now or never because otherwise I'm going to end up staying. And so I packed 2 bags, called a cab, and then just kind of couch surf from there. And, I think a big thing about this that a lot of people might not see if they were to go through it, but so many people stay in their comfort zone or don't take the leap or don't do the jump or don't do these big scary things. But I had to do it out of survival at that point.
You had no choice.
It made it so much easier now because I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to move to a different country. So what?
Yeah. Like my first question as you were describing what you just said was like, well, where did you go first? Like once you plan this out, like, cause I think back to being 14, 15, 16, and I know that I can go there with you and like do this comparison of us having really different upbringings. And if I had to guess, cause we've obviously talked about this before, I probably have a really similar upbringing to Sal. So like understanding like his, like, you know, childhood, we grew up in similar areas for a while. I was like, oh, he must be from New Jersey too. This all makes so much sense. And I think that like hearing that, for as much as I am also a risk taker, it's for such different reasons than you, because I didn't have that same childhood experience. And I feel like the point that I want to make to the listener here that is kind of interesting, that I don't think we can do enough. And I think like our political environment, how charged the world is that we live in today, people feeling so sensitive and so polarizing, like nobody will sit down and have these types of conversations. But like, here's the thing about you and I, we grew up so differently. And you had to make certain decisions. I had to make certain decisions for such different reasons. But like, I feel like we also have so much in common. And I think so many people are so quick to just assume like that, like you said, the shame that you felt, the assumption that people would think that you were a deadbeat, that you were coming from this broken home, that how could you ever possibly go live the life that you are now? And I look at you and I'm like, I knew the first time we met that like, I just had this sense that like you had been through some shit and like you had a very like raw way about you. And I knew that we could connect on that because I'm so direct, but like it's for different reasons, which is really cool. Like when you think about it, like when you think about the impact that somebody's childhood has on them, I am obsessed with this. And my listeners know this because for all of 2024, I dove like super deep into self-development coaching. And I've had my coach Oliver on this show before. And we've done a lot of content together. Even when I do solo episodes, I reference a lot of the work that I've done with him. I feel like personally, one of the biggest changes I've seen in my fitness journey was actually doing inner child work, because I finally got to a place where I could track my food because I recognized it was self-respect. I could go to the gym because I recognized that that was an act of self-love. That's now transitioned massively into the Fitness Fix and the way that I coach. And, you know, just to bring this back specifically to like this point in your story, what I, again, think is so fascinating is like we kind of arrived at like really similar places now today, but the path that we took to get there was like night and day different. And you saying that like you just had to operate from this place of like, I'm moving to the US. I'm going to figure out a way. Like, I remember when we met, like your visa was like about to run out and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I got to go back to Canada. And you were talking about it and you were like way too calm in my book. Cause if I were, I would have been freaking out. I would have been like, I don't want to go back to Canada. I made a vow to myself that I'm never going back there. Like, especially because of like what you probably associate that with in your mind. I'd be like, no way. Like, I will like deport me if you have to, because I just don't want to go back. Right. So I think that's like really fascinating to hear you say like your reasons for just being like, I'm not afraid of this entrepreneurial journey. And, you know, too, like maybe the question to answer next here is, how did you make the transition from being a very traditional fitness coach to then a really big departure, in my opinion, to the way you coach today? Would you attribute it to the fact that like you just had to grow up really quick and you're not afraid to like make quick decisions, which is probably why you're a good entrepreneur too?
100%. I got tricked into being an entrepreneur and now I'm like,
you kind of did.
Sense. God has a plan.
Yeah, you kind of did. If you really think about it, like I can't, like when you had the job that you referenced when you were 16, I'm curious, did you hate it because you were like having to listen to authority?
I worked at Boston Pizza. You might not know what that is, but it's like a family restaurant. Like, and all like everyone deals with things differently. My boss is borderline abusive, like yelling at our faces, pushing us around. Gosh. I was like, I'm just happy I'm getting a paycheck. Like sometimes you knew I was part of your only mission. One that talked back to him, and he looked at me one time when I talked back to him, and he was like, "What did you say?" That's when I knew. I was like, me and authority. I'm not sure I'm the type to just like blindly go past it. I'm not sure that's for me. But to answer your question, I think that it's so funny because everyone says, bring your story into what you do. Like, it's such a huge piece of it. When I was a fitness coach, I was like, looking at my story, I had huge eating disorder issues. So I was like, that's it. right? There was almost this shadow mission where I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's it. It's like overcoming the eating disorder and then now being where I am. Maybe that's it. And now I look back and I laugh so hard because I really understand it's all to do with leadership. It's all to do with taking ownership, because I could have sat in that hole and blamed my parents for everything, which in fact my two sisters are still doing. And I think it's important, we're looking at, okay, cool, we've had such different walks of life and we both have gotten to some really good achievements, and we've gotten accolades and built businesses and done incredible things and grown as people. And it's always that the argument of nature over nurture. Does childhood matter, right? And at the end of the day, it all just comes down to, are you willing and are you capable of taking ownership? And that's what it was every step of the way. It wasn't about the luxury of having the choice. It was me just saying, okay, what can I control? What can I control? What can I control? And moving forward that way. And so it's so interesting to see the synergy of going from fitness coaching and starting to really recognize the lack of ownership in the space that we work in. And I just also want to preface the
How about lack of ownership in society, by the way? Like that could be a whole podcast for 2 hours. Yeah.
Everyone. And I think the coaching industry has so much magic to it. Like I'm in awe of it because there's so much goodness. And there's obviously a lot of nuance to that, where I started to see the duality of a lot of people who aren't integral, who are poor leaders, who, I'm going to be honest, reminded me of my parents. And that is the thing that just gets under my skin, where it's like you're pretending to be someone you're not, you're dishonest, you're leading from fear, you're doing all these things. And the reason it fires me up so much is because that's why I ran away from home. And I constantly think, if I had better leadership, how much different could I have turned out? Mind you, I'm so grateful for everything I went through at this point. There's not anything I would take back or change. I'm so, so, so blessed to have the story that I do. And I now know that God was with me every step of the way and it was intentional. And I do have that thought of, well, what happens when other people go under things like this? Because I can look at my siblings and say, they didn't even turn out anything close to me. Why might that be? And at the end of the day, I'm looking at, well, our leadership set us up to fail. I'm a miracle that I even came out to not be living on the street, doing drugs, doing all these different things, right? That's what the statistics would have had me do. Sure. And so I beat the statistics. That's impressive enough. The fact I'm even running a business is like extra. That's a bonus. And so I think it really just comes back down to looking at that level of ownership, number one, and then also the degree of leadership that got me to where I am now. And that's why I'm so passionate about it.
Okay. So like you just said, needing to take ownership, but also your point about referencing control and needing to control. When you think back to your decision at 16 to leave home, what were then your resources for leadership? Because now you're like out in the world by yourself. So like, who are you listening to? Who are you talking to? How did you navigate your way to college? Like, what did that journey look like for you? Because clearly, if we're going to make this argument that you have to take radical responsibility, right? And like, it always makes me think of like, anytime I hear this, I immediately think about Andy Frisella and like everything that he does, because like he has that great line that it's like, having radical responsibility is the actual rebellion. And he says like the ultimate rebellion, and he's right. And I think you kind of really embody that, because think about like you rebelling in this way to be like, I'm leaving, I'm figuring this out, I'm doing this for myself. But making it really clear that at 16 years old, you're still a child. You never had those leadership positions. You never had the right figures in place for you. It would be really easy for you to get stuck in the victim mentality, to your point where like, I wouldn't blame you for that at all. I would be like, yeah, like it's sad, but it makes sense. And what a sad way to see the world too, because then that does perpetuate this victim culture. But for somebody out there listening to this, no matter how old they are, like for you to be that courageous to just be like, I got some money, I packed up my bags, I definitely don't have enough money to survive. Hopefully you had a few good friends in place, which it sounds like that was probably a resource you relied on. Like where did you start to get inspiration from? Like, what did you do? I need to know.
I had my job at Boston Pizza at that time. So I think I was hosting. So it wasn't even like serving, bartending, anything like that. I was only allowed to host because I was underage. So you can't do anything with alcohol. So I called the cab, went to my aunt's. My aunt goes, Chelsea, she's literally best friends with my parents, by the way, goes, you can't stay here. So obviously then it's couch surfing to my boyfriend's house, ended up leaving him, going to my friends, bing, bang, boom. But I think to answer your question, and I think this is going to be so juicy and such a huge piece of the podcast, is it all is based around who you have around you. Your support systems will
Yeah.
make and break your ability to heal. And it's so funny because especially in the self-help space, there's this big idea that it's self-help, right? You help yourself and let the others drown. Fuck them if they're not on the same page. Boundaries. Without the actual cognitive understanding that no, like we heal to be better in relationship, to be better in community. And for me, I had my whole family at Boston Pizza raised money to buy me my first bed. It was the only
Wow.
piece of that I had. They took me grocery shopping. Like they, as a whole group of people, like took me in as their own. They all fundraised for me. They gave me all the stuff from their homes that they didn't need. On top of that, I had a guidance counselor that helped me go through all the social workers and got me in touch with everybody. I was in drama as well. Like shout out to theater kids. Love, like if you have a good drama mama, like a good theater mom, you know the feeling. And she would like eat half of her dinner and give me the other half. Like
Wow.
she, during high school, trying to graduate at the same time as working full time and being in theater, which that in itself is a full-time
That's like
job
a
if you know
job.
the
Yeah.
actor grind. And
Yeah.
so we had a couch even downstairs in the dressing room that she'd let me nap in during my spares. I was the only person she'd let do it. And I'd go nap downstairs during my spares and during my lunches so I could rest because usually I wasn't sleeping. I was working all night. And so I had this, it was honestly like a lot of women around me that were really strong to help lift me up into who I
Mhm.
needed to be because I didn't have a license then. I didn't even know I could drive. I didn't even have a cup
Yeah.
to my name. So all
Right.
these women came and like rallied around me. And it's actually super touching because I found my yearbook last week and I was looking through it and I have my guidance counselor and my drama mama, Lana O'Brien, and you know, all these people that were so huge in my life just really saying like, I'm so proud of you for even getting to graduation. Because at that
Mhm.
point, that was it for me. If I can just
Yeah.
graduate, if I can just make it to this point. And I think for everyone, yeah, radical self-responsibility is important. And also having community that can support you and believe in you, that's the best thing that you will ever have. And I think
Yeah.
that makes or breaks someone.
It totally does. I mean, that's our connective point, right? Like, if you think about the thing that introduced us, it was from community. And, like, interestingly, to draw that like exact invisible string, you were coming from another community where you didn't feel that alignment in your business. And then you came to our community. And what I thought was really cool, like, I had already been a part of our community for like a year and a half. And so I knew most of the people there, like we had never met in person, but I could imagine how like somebody could walk into a room like that and feel overwhelmed and intimidated because it's like all these women who are all already know each other. And I think I actually said this. I don't know if you were there, like in the meeting where we were speaking about this, but at the time we were just like all describing like our previous experience to trying to navigate entrepreneurship, either in another group by ourselves, just talking to friends, like these makeshift kind of like situations, communities through Instagram, whatever. And I actually said at one point that like the biggest difference that I felt in my life by the time I reached WWBA was any other female community that I had been in, I would have just immediately think back to like my sorority. And candidly, I know there's people that I went to college with who listen to this show, and it's no secret that was like the worst 4 years of my life in some capacity, in the sense that like I won't say the worst 4 years, like I'm hyperbolizing because I went through much worse, like intense, like emotional things 5 years later. But when I was in college, like that environment of being around other women, it was awful. Like nobody was nice to each other. Everybody was like on the defense. We had a lot of drama inside of our sorority in particular, because there was like this massive, cheating scandal, like cheating on a test. And it was like between two
Oh,
people, it was this whole big thing. And it just made me kind of like sit back, and I didn't realize it, but like after college, I just like repelled being in groups of women other than the gym. And like that was the only place I wanted to be around like groups of women. And it was because we were all different ages. A lot of them were also moms. So I really looked up to them in that way. And I felt like I fit in better with people that were older than me. Fast forward to 2021, 2022 ish, when I first met Kendall through Paige, I was like, oh, like this is like finally meeting everybody in person. For some reason, I had that light bulb moment when we were all together of like, the last time I was in a group like this, I hated it. And like now I'm in this group and I really enjoy it because all of these people like are all looking to achieve something similar, but in a way that's like, we're all going to get there. And like, we can actually help each other in the process of doing it. So I love that you can look back and recognize that all of those women were really helpful for you, because like, I think about the fact that like, when I think about a lot of my female friendships, my best quality female friendships I've made between 28 and almost 31. I'm not friends with like 90% of the people that I grew up with. And for a while I had a hard time with that because I was like, this is sad. Like, and I had to cut some of those people out of my life completely because of the worst experiences that I was just referencing that I went through, and calling off a wedding, quitting my job, leaving a relationship, like all of these things at once, that I felt like by the time that I met you, I was in a place in my life where it was just like, oh, like I can meet somebody at this point, and because I'm so real with myself, like I know that we're either going to be friends or not. Like, and if we're not, that's okay.
100%. I completely agree. And it's funny too that you even say that, because all those people that helped me all back then, you'd think like I owe them my life. All blocked. We don't talk anymore. And we grow through these stages. And I also like so believe just in everybody is there for a reason in your lifetime. Like I've never had nobody in my life. There's always been like bridging the gap of like, okay, this group of friends fizzles out into this group of friends. And it's
That's
like
so interesting. Yeah.
tree to tree. Yeah. I really do think that obviously like God plants people in our life for a reason. And it's so funny that, you know, all those years ago, even us connecting at that event have been able to stay like so intertwined. Like our paths just crossing, going so similar directions. It's so cool to be able to stay in connection in that way.
No, it's so true. Cause like, even then, like I keep saying, like, I didn't really like get to know you at that time because there were other people there that like I had been talking to virtually for like almost 2 years, that like naturally it was just kind of like, oh, like I'm hanging out with them because I want to catch up with them. Like, I feel like there's so much history there. And like, I think we just like randomly like got introduced for like maybe 10 minutes. And then we're just like part of a bigger group. And I would like hear you say certain things, followed you on Instagram, and even just like in the time in between, you're so right. Like I don't really think that had you not made the transition into the type of coaching that you're doing now, I'm not sure that like I would have had such a like strong like affinity to want to stay connected with you, because I would have just looked at it and been like, oh yeah, like we're in the same group. Like we met that one time. She's really cool. But like there wasn't as much of that like connection point. It was over what you specifically started talking about.
100%. And the way that every time we post something, we're like, yes, say it louder. Yeah. Like being able to feed off each other in a way is so exciting. Cause I think especially like the way that you go about content and showing up online, and the same thing with me, is honestly so rare these days. And I think to be able to find people who just say it like it is, they're not afraid of maybe people getting mad at them. And you're just able to show up in such rawness and so real. It's so fucking refreshing to have someone where you're like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah. Like every time you post, I'm like, yes, that's like such a bar. And I also think too, this is something you could really relate to. And like, we could use this to kind of get into the whole conversation around making content. As you know, and as I've just started recently sharing with the listeners on this show, I've started to create more of a mastermind community for other business owners, whether they are in the fitness industry, whether it's brick and mortar. For me, just like really merging the diverse background that I've had from working in the whole finance industry to then boutique fitness, then into online coaching. But the through line for me being that I majored in journalism, and I always knew that I would do something with communications, but like the younger versions of me thought that I would be a broadcast journalist. And like every time I tell someone that, they're like, oh, I totally see it. Like they get it because they see like me being on camera, me talking. So the podcast is like the most full circle you can get with like that skill set.
100%.
And to me, it's no surprise that like when I tell people, oh, I've been podcasting for 5 years, they're like, oh my God, that's so long. I'm like, I feel like I just started this yesterday. And as an aside to that, like when I was 18, I was just starting my first journalism classes in college, and I had to walk around my college campus with like a tripod on my back and this big backpack with a huge camera in it. I would shoot, write, edit my own video, like the whole thing. That in so many ways, like this feels easy. And I say that to remind people that if you're listening to this as a coach, if you're listening to this as a business owner, if you're listening to this as somebody who has a desire to create content in some way, whether that's purely because it's your passion or because you want to sell something and you want to create a business off of it, please know that when you hear both of us speaking, like the life experiences that we've had and what we've chosen to do with the knowledge that we have has come from like 10 plus years. So for you to say, hey, like so many people could look at me and like that whole meme of like, I'm 26 and like, what do I have to say about life? It's like, actually, no, like I dealt with this so much when I was going through my journey of working in group fitness in particular. I got into the fitness industry at 18. I did it in college. I worked on my college campus. It was something that I never thought would be more than like a side hustle, but it kept following me to every city that I moved to. And when I eventually decided to go into group fitness full time, one of the biggest hangups that I had in person for truly like almost 7 years was people constantly telling me that I was too young to know what I was talking about. And it would drive me crazy because I would be like, why does that matter? I have so much to tell you about like why I think this thing will work. My brain works this certain way. I just want to tell you about it. And then fast forward to one of the darker periods of my life where I was trying to navigate, do I stay in group fitness or do I go back into a corporate job? And I thought about pursuing going back into a corporate job. Every interview I went on, every single time I was told, you're a typical millennial, you switch jobs too much, you're a flight risk, you're a liability, you're not going to be a good fit for this company. I started to believe that. And so I thought like I didn't have a place where I belonged and I just didn't know what to do with it, to the point where like that really mentally caused me to just fall apart. And then that led to like my own kind of awakening of like, I'm not marrying the right person. I need to make an environmental change and move. And like, I need more support with my family. So like you, I could say best things that's ever happened to me. But
Absolutely.
when we think about content, right? And we think about this ability for us to be able to be like, yeah, like it is refreshing the way we talk online. Or people message me all the time and they're like, how can I get your content brain? I wish I could let you download my brain. Like I really do. I want to give it to everybody because I see how many people are frustrated by social media. And I think it's so fucking fun. Like, I think it is the most enjoyable part of my day. My screen time, ask me how high it is. I will proudly tell you that it is hours a day. And it's not because I'm scrolling. It's because I am talking to people. I am talking to people who listen to this podcast. I have like 4 women who are my ride or die podcast listeners. One of them lives all the way in Australia. Like, she's so far away. Like, it's so cool. And then I have another one who, like, I was a guest on her nutrition coach's show. She's not even my client. And she DMs me all the time. Shout out to Kristen, because I know she's listening. And she's like, I hope it's okay that I'm talking to you about this stuff, because I have another coach and like, I just love talking to you. And I'm like, hell yeah, it's okay. And she was just on his podcast as a client. And I'm like, so proud of her to be able to see that evolution. And for me to know that there's people all the way across the world listening to this, like, that is the sickest part in the best way. That is like, people are sleeping on when it comes to Instagram for that reason. Like, if you can't draw that parallel, if you're a brick and mortar business owner and you can't draw the parallel that like you have continuity through your digital platforms and through your digital footprint, you're sleeping on money, you're sleeping on business. And so for me, like, I've noticed this since I was like 21, and it would grind my gears that people would be like, you're too young to have that opinion. And I'm like, why? Like, I can tell you all these things that I was able to do. Like, look at this business that went from 0 clients to 500. Look at this gym that went from this many clients to this many clients. Like, that wasn't by accident. And it wasn't just because like I, posted one time on Instagram and told people to come in. Like, it wasn't because at one point when I had business owners who were like, if you build it, they will come. It wasn't because of that shit, because that doesn't work, right? So for you, like, as I'm describing all of this, and maybe even as you've kind of like come to this point in the last 12 months, as you've really shifted your content and like your message, I'd love to hear you describe like what this shift has looked like for you as you typically talk in your Instagram posts, going from like the booty pictures to now talking about like these really like much deeper topics that sometimes like they might seem like they don't land all the time, because it is like a higher level conversation, and that's humbling too.
100%. I love this. I think this is so big. And I want to say on this, like anybody who's listening to this, who's maybe like, wow, I want to pick their brains over content. They seem to make it look so easy or they have such a good time with it, whatever. One thing I want to say is social media is only hard when you are ungrateful for the opportunity it gives you.
So
Like
true.
I think about, imagine if this was 20, 30, 40 years and you were trying to run a business and you
Yeah.
sit imagine sitting in your chair at home thinking of ways to get more clients, being like, wow, if only I could just like post something to go out to the whole world to know about me. Oh, wait, we have that
We
now. Like,
can.
that's
Yeah.
such a gift. And so that is something
Your
I
perspective. You're so right.
consistently remind myself of like social media is
Yeah.
only hard when you're entitled and ungrateful. So
It's
period.
no, you're so right. Like that in and of itself, like that's a clip right there because I think for me, like if I ever think about like the only time I get annoyed at Instagram is when 2 weeks ago, like I was trying to upload this reel and it just would not upload because it was like telling me that like it's still posting. And it was one of those videos where it was like 20 clips from like all different videos put together. So I think our phones are just like overloaded and they're like, this is like way too much media for a post plus the music. And I couldn't get the music to be lower than my voice. And my voiceover was so good. I was like, fuck this. And that kind of stuff. Like it will make me mad. But honestly, the reason why it makes me mad is because I know that my message is so important. And like, frankly, because I am my biggest fan and I'm allowed to be my biggest fan. Like people need to know that. I posted this on my stories 2 days ago. This woman who's an awesome business coach, her name's Jill. She did this really funny meme. It was like from somebody from The Office or one of those shows. And it was this guy like nodding his head, like listening to music. And she captioned it being like, me when I listen to my own podcast. And I shared it and I was like, that's the fucking energy that is required for you to be successful in the world we live in today with technology. Because, like, hell yeah, I rewatch my own stories and I'm like, ooh, love what I said there. Other times I'm like, you didn't say that the way you really wanted to. And that to me is like the secret sauce. Like it's the being grateful piece. But if you want to download my content brain, if you want to download Chelsea's content brain, here's the trick. And this is the part that you could speak to, in my opinion, better than me. I believe this is all about energy. And because of that, the trick to better content is you being more connected to who the fuck you are and you knowing exactly who you are.
Oh, bars. Clip that. That it's 100% true. And like to even go back on the parallel of when I first started posting content, like let's take it before I was even fitness coaching.
Sure.
I was trying to be an Insta hoe. Like, yes, I had it in high school. You're posting like the hashtag toaster filter or whatever. It was all for funsies. And then all of a sudden there's this huge epidemic of no, you can blow up online. And at the time, let's just like set the scene. You're a teenager, your parents don't love you, you ran away from home, you have a nice body, and people are gaining followers and can also start to get money from this, right? What do you think is the big gold mine for someone who also is unemployable by nature? Okay, well, let me post my body online. And it picked up so quick for me. And I started getting like super creative. It was also like a creative outlet for me where I was like crawling up on basketball hoops and having my boyfriend at the time. Like I was like whole like sets and photo shoots, like going downtown, like doing the most outrageous like places and poses and things.
That's so cool.
Just trying to be like an Insta baddie, you know? And then I got the opportunity to understand what online coaching was. And they essentially was like, yeah, you need to post every day. I was like, easy, I do that anyways. Just instead of post lyrics as my caption, I'll just make it about fitness. So easy. But I think that was really what it started to get to was it was easy. Like I could just do it ass selfie in the mirror and I would get inbound leads and it was growing my business. But there was a deep part of me that, you know, when people refer to me, it was never about something I felt complimented on. Like, oh, she has a nice ass. You have such a nice body. Wow, she's so hot. That to me feels degrading. And for a while, obviously, there was this high of this recognition. People liked me. My picture were getting thousands of likes, which back then was like unheard of, right?
Yeah.
It was like, it's crazy.
So
but
true.
I was like getting like known in my town. Like people were like seeking out to me, all this stuff. And so I started to get that. And, you know, it got to a point where it started breaking my heart every time someone would reach out about, the pictures I'd post and things like that, because I was like, is that really what people think is the most interesting part of me? And, I've had this understanding, especially since the way I grew up, that I have so much more to share. And I started getting to the point as I was healing through all of my wounds and really going through therapy at the time and all of this, really understanding how powerful my story is. When I was in it, it was embarrassing, but overcoming it, oh, now
Yeah.
it's inspirational. And so now sharing it, everyone, I'd be the one at house parties, like talking about what I went through, and people would always be so mind blown. And I kind of got to a point where I'm like, how immature and insane is it for me to only be showing what my body looks like when I have so much more to offer? Because I've always loved psychology and, looking into human development and reading the self-help books. I just never really talked about it. And so it kind of got to a point where I was like, I'm doing not only me such a disservice because people don't actually know my heart, but I'm also doing my entire audience a disservice, because there could be someone hanging on by a thread, like threatening their own life because they feel alone in the world, that my story could help remedy. And so it kind of got to a point where it wasn't just a nice to do or, oh, this would be cool to share my story. It got to a point where I was like, this is a necessity, because people do need to hear this, because one day all of our stories differently will be someone else's survival guide. And when we take that seriously, I think that also places the responsibility and the gratitude with the content that we can start to produce.
Oh yeah. Like I think for me, the gratitude has like come even more naturally, because like the same way you're saying, like, yeah, there was this piece of me that like you get so many likes, you get the validation off of that. There's a validation to an extent. I think that's still the appropriate word for it. When someone messages you and is like, hey, the story that you shared, like I did this recently. I did a podcast episode back in like November. I'd gone through a breakup. It was kind of shitty. It was very shitty. And it was something that I was like feeling some type of way about, because I had kind of made a promise to myself that I was not willing, and I still feel this way, to talk about the next person that I was dating in like a serious way on my social media, unless I was like really sure that this was somebody who's going to be in my life for a long time, if not for my lifetime. And I had started to do this with this person, and then it became abundantly clear that they were not going to be that person in my life. And I felt like really torn, because I was kind of going through this same like deja vu feedback loop of the last time I was in that situation was when I made the decision to call off my wedding. And I kind of like debated back and forth, because I was like, I don't know if I want to integrate this into my content, because I have a piece of me, and I'm curious how you feel about this as you've started to share more of your history. My Instagram started to gain a following when I was originally vulnerable about canceling my wedding. Like that was a catalyst for me. There was certain like this, I don't know if you know this girl, but this woman, Maddie, she owns this like really big clothing company, and she does like drops on like specific days of the week because it's all online. It's called Shop Tallulah, if you've heard of it before. And she had been through an experience where like she was, her like boyfriend, who is not now her husband, like traveled all the way around the world to propose to her, and like she felt obligated to say yes, because he like flew from like North Carolina to, I forget wherever she was, like Africa or something like that. She was on like a mission trip, and she like felt like she was like needing to say yes in the moment. So she shared this whole story. I didn't know that about her. She actually used to live in Charlotte, where I lived, and we had some really close mutual friends. So I was like, oh, wow, this is so crazy. So like I share that, inspired me to share my story. And then she reshared it. And that was like what really started to open things up for me, which was really cool. But I highlight that to say, now fast forward like 5 years almost later, it'll be 5 years in like 2 weeks. I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about that anymore, because I was like, do I want to talk about this? Because like there's more to me as a human and how I've evolved beyond like this experience that I went through, where like you were saying earlier, like the way that people respond to you to be like, oh, you like left home, you're so brave. Anytime I tell somebody that I called off a wedding, the first thing they say is, you're so brave. I'm going to be honest, I fucking hate that. So if you like see me out and I tell you that story, you don't need to say that, because I don't feel that way about it anymore. Like I appreciate it. And it was a very hard decision, but when I first went through it, I hated when people said I'm sorry. And now I'm at a place of being like, you know what? Like it was brave, but I was also so sure after the fact that I made the right decision that it didn't feel brave because like I knew my life would have been so misaligned and I would have been so unhappy had I done anything different. That said, when I think about like fast forwarding to this most recent example back in November, I recorded this podcast where I was like, hey guys, I'm going through a breakup and I have a learning opportunity for myself and a reminder for all of you. Because the last time I went through a breakup like this, I didn't have a nutrition coach in my back pocket. I didn't have a support system. I didn't have my business coach. I didn't have all these things and all these tools that I have today. That what happened? I gained 40 pounds. I had a horrible relationship with food. I had severe insomnia. I tanked the shit out of my hormones. And guess what? 5 years later, I'm not going to do any of that. And that became the podcast episode. And what was so cool to this validation conversation was I got so many DMs from people being like, I am so thankful that you shared that story because like I'm going through this hard thing in my career or I'm going through this tough thing in my personal relationship. And I really needed those reminders to just focus on the basics, to hang out with my friends. And a lot of them were like, I'm so sorry that you're experiencing that. And most of them were my clients being like, we had no idea, you're so professional and you're so like, you have such a good separation that we would have no clue. And I so appreciate that that's like a two-way street. And they're like, if you need anything, I'm like, I'm good, you guys. But it's so cute. That. Like, it's so great to know that you built that kind of community instead of, like you're saying, the person who's DMing you to be like, yeah, you have a nice butt. Like, there's no substance to that. And I mean, hey, like, you got a great butt, but like, come on, like, it's like, I got a great butt and all these other things about me too. Right. So, you know, in thinking through that like inflection point for me of 5 years ago, and then now it's been much easier for me to integrate like new iterations of myself and like new versions of myself. But I think you'd be a really good person to share your perspective on that because you've had these like really significant, massive shifts. And I would even argue, I think more recently in your content, you're kind of going through like another one because I've seen you talk more about faith in comparison to even like 6, 8, 10 months ago. And that's like such a departure from where you were when you were posting your booty pics, right? So for someone listening, like, how do you do that? How do you feel okay? And how do you feel convicted enough to actually make these transitions and just go for it? Because I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. They're afraid to share their story. And you said it before, like it's storytelling. You got to share it.
Oh my gosh, this is so good because especially anyone in content is you build up this image of what people know you as. And I think also we're talking content, but I see so many women do this in real life. Oh, but they know me as the overgiver. Oh, but they know me as the DD. Oh, but they know me as this. So we keep ourselves in identities that we often outgrow because it's what is accepted and what is also celebrated among our peers, whether that's online or offline. We all have done it. And it kind of, for me, getting to the point where can I give myself permission to step into this next level? And, you know, I'm going to be also really open because there's always this constant drop in my stomach when I notice that there's a shift happening in me where I'm like, oh, but people know me for this. Like, please don't let me need to let this go because people like me for this. Is that fear of abandonment that people won't like me anymore? Because I went from dark sport, rah, hustle, like fuck your feelings, to now I'm flowy, love myself, doing all this stuff, woo universe, manifestation, to now another like huge polar opposite, like you were saying. And I'm like talking about Jesus, I'm talking about sanctification, I'm reading my Bible. And there's like, if you look over, and mind you, this is like 2-3 years, this is in a small amount of time.
It's a really short amount of time. Yeah.
Shifting, but when you're so committed to your growth, I kind of have it's just constant permission giving where I just have to like really let myself go into each level. And I think there's also this recognition of I know what it's like to stay in relationship or to stay in bondage to a past identity that makes me feel trapped. And I am so scared to do that to myself. And so the way that I see it, I'm like, I would rather get myself so open out there to be talking about faith, to be talking about Jesus, to be talking about all these things so that I don't have a client that comes to me one day trying to talk to me about woo-woo universe things and I can't relate to them anymore. Like I would rather have it all out there so that especially as a business owner, my clients know what they're getting into, period. Because especially with the depths of the work that I do, I want them to understand what my values are, where I stand on things, the way that I think about things, because often that's a selling point for people into my programs. And I think before there was a lot of reluctancy with like some stuff of like sometimes sharing my story, tiptoeing around manifestation and woo-woo stuff, but a lot of that is still accepted. Some people might think it's BS, but they're not going to unfollow me over it. So when this whole conversation of me talking about Jesus came up, like I had a moment with God where I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Like this is my Bowser. This is the ultimate, like, okay, I just want to completely destroy my social, any type of authority I've created, right? In my head, I'm like, well, here we go. Might need to get another job. We'll see. But I think also like to the level of what you're saying is like, where do I get the obedience? And this kind of comes into it is I have so much conviction in what I've been called to do and who I've been called to be that it's not even a choice of whether I share it or not, because I truly feel like I feel God in me. Like I feel God working through me. And that's why I'm so convicted, because I'm like, it's not even if I want to do it anymore. It's I need to give glory up to him and whatever he's convicting me to do. Like I gotta play dead and roll over. And there's a lot of times I don't want to do it, but I've seen time after time after time when I am obedient and I listen to what I feel he's putting on me and I listen. And obedience isn't just doing what he says to do, it's doing it when he says to do it. So even when I went from completely calling up my business partner in my fitness and in my fitness program and my business, just the day after I talked to God, I was sitting there, I was wrestling with him, I was having this journal session. It was probably like the second time I've ever prayed in my life, like actually prayed. And I just heard him be like, you have to leave. And so the next morning I called her up. I was like, I can't do this. Actually, I texted her. And so that was a big part of the problem because I was being a little pussy. I should have called. But it was that moment that I saw him say something to me. For the first time ever, I actually felt God talking to me. And I acted on it when he said to do it. And I look back to how fruitful that has been, that level of obedience. Now it just has a point where I'm like, I just have to do it. And I think that also plays out from leaving home in that blink of a moment is I don't hesitate. If someone is telling me to leap, I will leap. Like I would rather look back and say, maybe I shouldn't have done that and learn from it than to be like, I didn't jump when I needed to and now I'm stuck. And I think that's what constantly creates that conviction, because there's something so much deeper in me that's like, you just have to do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, my point a few minutes ago when I said the whole comment about like not appreciating when people say you're brave, you just articulated why that bothers me, because it's just like there was no other choice. Like it was like, this isn't like a brave, that was it. Like that's what felt like so like in my heart, like what I should do. And I knew it from the beginning, and I allowed myself to be so wishy-washy with it that like the wishy-washiness was what tortured me. Like it wasn't the decision itself that I was making. What hurt me more like emotionally and mentally in that time was the indecision and like staying in the place of indecision. So I fully agree with you in this idea of like doing things right away. And I'll also share with you, I've not shared this on the podcast before, so it's a little bit of tea and like something that'll be, it's like ironic for you to say this because you don't know this about me. But one of the big reasons why I felt that I was not walking into the right marriage was because we had really different stances on religion. And it was something for me in my life where it didn't play as big of a role in my life growing up. And like, it was more like the whole like CEO Catholic, Christmas, Easter only, like that's when you go to church sort of thing, if you've never heard that before. And, you know, like my parents, like my grandparents still go to church. My parents grew up with that, but it was just like transparently something where we played a lot of sports growing up. Yes, I did all my sacraments. Yes, I can get married in a church if I would like to. Yes, my brother and sister-in-law did. Yes, my younger brother and his future wife will do the same. But like, it just wasn't like really ingrained into our lives the way it was for my partner, who went to church every single weekend. And so what manifested in our relationship was that he wanted me to go with him. And I took it as, well, okay, like this didn't play as big of a role in my life. So if it's important to you, I'm willing to be open to it. But where this changed and where this really shifted was in something you just said that was very different of him and his family's interpretation of their relationship to God. And you just mentioned this idea of obedience and acting like swiftly and like really actually listening. And what's so interesting to hear you say is their interpretation, at least from my perspective, so I will give that to them, was like, be obedient to the point where you shouldn't even try, because like whatever's meant for you is, and you're like, your face is going, holy shit, because imagine me being with somebody who comes across as complacent. Like, do you know how much that like hurt me to my core? Because that's how I interpreted it. It came across as complacency to the point where I was like, but who are you in a relationship with here? Like, yes, you can have that relationship and I respect that relationship. But like at the end of the day, like we still have to work hard. We still have to make an effort. We still have to take action. It's like not this whole like passive relationship of like, we'll just pray about it. And that was often shoved in my face when I was going through really difficult times of quitting my job and trying to navigate. Do I go back to a corporate job? The answer always was just pray about it, just pray about it, just pray about it. And that just never hit with me. And for the last 5 years, one of the reasons why I've never talked about this is because I was not in a place to like verbalize it. And you just gave really good context of like why I didn't agree, but I felt like I couldn't say it because I also felt like I didn't have the right words in the sense of like, I don't think so, because the perspective that I was being met with was that. And then from their side, they really felt that like I was not grateful because I was not satisfied with what I had laid out in front of me of like, well, there's the next thing and we need to do the next thing after that. And we need to do the next thing after that. So it just turned into a bigger conversation. Forget the religious piece for a second. Difference in values, because of the way we operated and saw the world, I had a vision for like the level of work that I wanted to put into certain aspects of my life, like career, that was really different than what my partner saw for their self in terms of like, they were okay with their 9 to 5 being their 9 to 5. And I know that if he heard this, he would say this too. I don't know that I would have the business that I do because I wouldn't be the person that I am had I stayed in that relationship. So I don't think that relationship would have given me the access of like what I needed inside of me, not external, but like what I really needed to unlock inside of like my true self to be able to then pursue the Fitness Fix, to start the FYX podcast, to sit here right now and even say any of these things to you and not like worry about how it might land for somebody. All because of what you just said, to where I find it like crazy fascinating that all of this makes so much sense to me, because I'll be honest with you, normally I'm very uncomfortable by content about religion based on everything I just shared with you. You could probably understand why. But I've never felt that way with your page. And like, I've never had an issue with like you posting that. Like I've never read it. Like there are people like I can't follow on social media. I actually had this conversation with one of your clients the other day because we were talking about this subject. And I told her, I was like, oh, you should follow this person, but I'm going to be honest with you. I don't follow them. Here's the context of why I don't follow them. I knew them in a different light. And like, I just don't know that they're genuine for everything they're posting, but they do post a lot about like their journey in their faith that I think you might see some value in. And like, I think about that person's content. It's so triggering. It makes me feel so uncomfortable because for me, it feels like the very classic, and I'm being like super blunt with all this, but I feel like I had to get it off my chest. So everybody listening, like this is my hot take. And like, this is more of the juice of a story I've never told, but it, to me, like there's this part of my life that led me to the decisions that I have to walk away from that relationship, that environment, etc., that were because I felt like so much of it was phony, mega church, be a part of this community that I'm not actually sure what this community really stands for underneath all of it, to the point where like I cannot consume that content because it really like just like pushes a button in me to that. There was a point where like the first 2 years after I went through this experience, like I refused like to go to church with my parents, like even for Christmas. And my mom like didn't understand it. And I know she'll listen to this podcast episode because she always does. And hopefully this will give her more context. But like, it just like, I had this negative connotation to it. And what you just mentioned about like really actually praying and listening, but knowing your backstory and knowing your history, I can get behind everything you just said. Like I can get behind it in a way to be so like, cool. I get it. Like I do understand that. And like, that's a, let's call it like version or like somebody else's iteration of like spirituality that I can agree with. And I've always kind of taken this stance of like, and I'll be persecuted by this person's family for saying this, I don't see myself as religious. I see myself as more spiritual. And the reason why I would say I don't see myself as religious is because their definition of religion was my problem. Like it was the like, hey, if you're a Christian, Why are we judging other people? Hey, if you're a Christian, why are you so quick to be like, oh, nope, these people shouldn't do this, this, and this. This is bad. This is not good. Like that to me is kind of a double standard. And the Jersey girl in me was not going to sit there and not call it out. So that's what led to a lot of like,
oh my gosh,
this
so
going
good.
back and forth. So yeah.
Well, and it's even like, it's the difference too. Like you might have even heard this, but it's the difference between relationship and religion. Because even people look at me
Sure.
and they're like, oh, you're religious now. And it makes my skin crawl because it's
like
the
you don't
same
like
thing.
that word.
My parents growing up were like, we're Christian. I'm like, you literally have cocaine on the table and you beat us. Where?
Like, yeah.
Where is he? And so that's always been so shocking where people are like, oh, you're religious. I'm like, no, I'm not. I have a personal relationship with who I believe God and Jesus is, my own iteration of the Bible. And the only reason I can look at these things and resonate with it and look at it truthfully is because I've done my own self-work. Because I think a lot of people try and turn up the Bible to be like, this is the answer to all the problems. And I do believe that it is
deserves
helpful.
an amen, because that's exactly what would drive me nuts about it, was that like it became a pass for like sweeping things under the rug of like, oh, we don't talk about that because like it's going to cause XYZ problem. Wait a second. I thought this was supposed to be a safe space. So why aren't we talking about these things? It doesn't make sense.
100%. It's like, let's not talk about what the pastors were doing behind the scenes. And we're going to, shut that off and not talk about it. It's like, no, we have to have these uncomfortable conversations and do your own self-work so that you can better understand God. Because anybody who hasn't done the depths of their inner child healing, all the stuff from their childhood, all this stuff will never understand God in the way that they want to. Because at the end of the day, we cannot understand his love if we don't even have it for ourselves. And that's where so much of it comes down. How are we supposed to respect a God when you can't respect yourself and draw a boundary?
Oh, that's so huge. Yeah. And to your point of like doing more of the self-work, maybe that hits for me in a much deeper way today because of knowing what I've done for myself in like the last 2 to 3 years, that like, if you tried to even say that to me 5 years ago, I wouldn't really like understand what you mean. And I also have much more clarity on that statement now because, and I'm not saying this to throw anybody under the bus, but there is a lot of lack of self-work being done by the individuals who had the difference in opinion to my own, that like something about it just felt like there was something that just like, there was so much friction and I couldn't like pinpoint the friction, if that makes sense, of like why it seemed like the word I used before, phony. But to me, what you said really captures that.
I love that. Yeah, it's like spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
Ain't no need for that.
Yeah.
Throw that shit out. Goodbye.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, I want to be respectful of your time. Of course, like we probably have a 3-hour podcast, but I'd love for you, just as we kind of like move along a little bit further in your story and keeping that timeline and this thread to everything, we have like the most recent iterations that you've gone through and you kind of describing like, here are some of the shifts that I've made in my content. But I'd love for you to talk about what you actually do inside of your program in Wholehearted, and maybe even making the comparison of like, okay, we backtrack like maybe almost 2 years, like 18 months when you walked away from your fitness coaching business. At that time, like what did your coaching look like versus what it looks like right now and who you help? Because it's so different. It's cool to describe.
So when I was fitness coaching, I was taught, and mind you, this was a very different business coach than either of us have been with. You obviously know who I'm referring to, where it was like, hire out every single section in your business. So I had someone doing my shadow coaching. So I essentially wasn't even supposed to be coaching my clients. I had, I think two VAs, they'd sell people into the program. And like, I tried to be as ingrained into it as possible, but I was reaching like 60, 70 clients on the form of burnout. Let's also look at the financials, 30, 40K months, 40K of debt. I was accruing more debt every month than I was
gonna
actually
say, you had so many people on your business that like, how were you really seeing a return on that?
I wasn't at all. So it was just like a disaster. There was a lot of things that just didn't make sense. I was following blind advice, just trying to build up this quote unquote empire that was completely broken, had no funnels, had no structure, etc. And so in leaving that, and I'm not here to like shit on the business. It just isn't how I would do things nowadays.
That's what they knew. So that's what they taught you.
Absolutely. I'm sure that they probably improved by now. And if I went back, they probably have integrated a lot of things that I now have also learned the hard way, which I seem to do often. God's like, let's just give her all the
Wait, did I DM you the other day and make the joke of like the toughest, God gives the battles to the toughest soldiers? Because it's true. And you're like, I don't need one more of these.
I'm like, we already had that. Like,
Yeah.
do I need to give you a flashback? But
Yeah.
it's so funny because then when I walked away, I had this like existential crisis where, okay, it was like check-ins, fitness, like I was taking people from all walks of life. I didn't even have a niche. Like I
Okay.
was just helping people. It was like a little bit messy, but what I will say is I've always been so passionate about talking about the self-help, like talking about the healing, talking about the limiting beliefs, talking about all these things that
So
I
you
think
did
to a
have that
certain
in the
degree were
mix.
taboo. Yeah, I didn't market it though. They came in and I was like, well, where is that coming from?
Oh, okay. So it was happening on the back end of your business. Got it.
Yeah. And
Got it.
that's where I built like a lot of my community because I've always articulated my thoughts in that way and have always really
Sure.
challenged people in those
And that makes
beliefs too.
sense why you started a podcast, because you probably felt
100%.
like the space to talk about that there made more sense for you.
Yeah. And I started my podcast before I even started coaching. So mine's
Oh,
probably
wow.
coming
Okay.
up close to like
Yeah.
5 years or something now too, where I was like, yeah, I just need a place to talk about this and to share my
Hell yeah.
story and what have you. And I think what really stood out to me was, okay, I was going through all of this through fitness, but the biggest reason why people hired me, stayed with me, liked me, etc., was because of the mindset aspect. And at the time, I started having fitness coaches reach out to me saying, hey, but you do mindset coaching. And I'm like, yeah,
Oh,
so this chick's gonna pay me for mindset coaching. Like
like
it
what is
was,
that? You
yeah,
didn't
I
want
was
to
like,
fit into the meme. Yeah.
and I was like, who's gonna pay money just for mindset? Like, because I also, mind you, everything that I know up until the last like year or two, I thought was just common knowledge, realizing
Well,
now that it's
yeah, because
not.
that actually ties back to like the whole question we got on about your journey of like all the women that supported you. I'm not going to lie. My expectation of what you were going to say was like that. I don't know if you know like any of like the person that I think of like in bits and pieces when you share your story is because she's also Canadian. I'm sure that's part of it. Mimi Bouchard. Have you ever like looked at her journey? Okay, so she doesn't have like the level of trauma that you experienced in her childhood, but at one point she was like living in London and she was trying to be on like a TV show. She now has like a meditation app and like does a lot of similar like healing type of work. But she talked about the fact that like what changed her ability to get into mindset and become like mostly an influencer that then developed this whole program around coaching and like rewiring your brain is she would just like listen to certain people. She would listen to their Audible, like who were known for being mindset coaches. Like I forget there was one guy that she would just like listen to on repeat and I'm it's escaping me who it is, but the Tony Robbins type people of the world. So I
Yeah.
expected you to say that when you started talking about like, well, what the heck did you do to get through high school and then to transition into college, eventually moving to the US? Like I was assuming that you were using like all of these external resources, but it sounds like you just like had some of this inside of you to your point of what you just mentioned that like you thought some of this was common knowledge.
100%. A lot of it, like I used to be like a Tumblr girl, not in a way that I was posting the cute photos. Like I was
Yeah.
depressed talking about wisdom and psychology on the internet with strangers. And so a lot of this was just like a lot of lived experience. Mind
Huh.
you, I did
That's
go
cool.
through a phase once, probably about like 3, 4 years ago, where I started realizing, okay, I need to like get some more people on deck because my friends don't get it. And I need to
Okay.
talk to people who get what's going on inside of my head. So I'd listen to Oprah every single day. But at the time, I didn't really know podcasts. My friends like
Mm-hmm.
were 16, 17, were sneaking
Yeah.
out to school fields getting wasted.
Yeah. And like it's even an interesting experience. Like you're the second person that I've had on the show recently who is like close to my age, but technically you're a different generation. And like, you know, what you said at the beginning of like you're technically like 94 years old and your soul is like really funny with the point I'm about to make. But like technically like I'm a millennial and you're like on the cusp of being more Gen Z than me. And for that reason, I do think like it's worth mentioning that at the time when you were 16 and 17 years old versus when I was 16 and 17 years old, Instagram was very established for you, but not for me. When I was in high school, like that was barely just a thing. When you were in high school, that was the thing. And because of that timeline, like I think it's important for people to remember that. And I called this out in the episode I did with my friend Sandalina, because she has used TikTok as a platform for herself for something really amazing, like to give a platform to Middle Eastern creators. She's from Pakistan. Like
Wow.
it's really, really cool what she's been able to do. But her relationship to technology is different than mine in the sense that even though there's only like a 6-year age gap between her and I, or like 5 years between me and you, technology, like social media as a platform, popped off in that time in a way that because it was like such an influential like set of years of your life, your relationship to it is going to be different. And I happen to have her on my show, like on the heels of everything going on with the TikTok ban. So I wanted to talk to her about that because I was like, and I'll put this in the show notes for everybody if you didn't listen to that episode, but like I wanted the Gen Z perspective because I don't have it. Like I do remember that when I was 10, and like you have some of this too, but it's going to become less and less and less, which is insane to think about. Like our children will not know a world where these things didn't exist. I remember when I only had one computer in my house and me and my brother had to take turns, like just to play games on it. And like my mom would limit our screen, like usage of like AIM, and like putting our away message up was like a big deal. There are people who are like, what are you talking about if they hear this? And two, like we had to go play outside, like go outside and play. That's not a thing for kids today. And I just think it's really like, I think we kind of forget that sometimes because like people will hear you be like, oh yeah, you're 26, Chris is 30. Like it's not that like of a big age gaps and it's kind of really not. But when we think about like not just the technological change, but the culture shifts that happened in that time frame of like how old you were, like for me to be 18 when Instagram became more popular versus you being 14 is really different. Like really, really different.
Massive. Those are huge gaps. It's so funny being a 98 too, because I am so perfectly in the cusp where I'm actually pretty sure there's a different word for like 98s and 97s because
I
it was
feel like
just
there should be.
I think
like
that there is.
Some of my best friends, like Sam is a 97 and my younger brother's a 96. And like, I just like, I wouldn't like, I put him in more of a millennial bucket, far greater than I would a Gen Z bucket. But like, I don't really put you in either one, I guess.
So we're pumped together, but it's so funny growing up too, because it was like, I remember having the Walkman with I had a CD collection and that was how you listen to music. And then iPods start coming out and you go from the VCR to the DVD and you go from webkins and playing outside to now every child is wearing eyeshadow and has a cell phone. You know, it's such a
insane.
mindfuck. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so crazy. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out, like, as you were saying what you were saying, because I think like we sometimes forget that because like, even if you're listening to this and you're 40, 50, 60, like you could have yet another angle of what we're saying and interpret it differently or like with more experience of like the wisdom of you being alive for more years. Like, I think it's really freaking cool. My grandparents, like my grandpa has an Instagram and he goes on it in his 80s and like he knows how to use it and it's sick. Like he has an iPhone. The only thing he's still holding out on is he does prefer to still use his iPod. Like he has an iPod that he still can use to listen to music. But we finally converted him like a few months ago. Like, hey, you can put all this music on your phone. Like it works. But like still, that's really cool. Like, and he'll listen to the podcast too. Like he can do all of it, which is insane.
He's such a G.
Yeah, like here we are being like, oh yeah, remember the time when we only played outside? Like I walked to school uphill both ways. It's the comparison of what we're saying. But anyways, so you got into all this mindset work that like it didn't really crystallize for you. It sounds like the external, like becoming an expert, like listening to other people who do this kind of thing. Like, did you go down the path of like doing any specific certifications, or is this something that you just have always taken such interest to? You started reading on your own.
Well, and it's funny too, because I think there is a piece of my brain that's always been geared towards this, where in high school, I remember telling my friends like, hey, I have a challenge for us. Let's not gossip for a week. Like, let's try and be good people. Like, hey guys, like they'd be talking shit and I'd try and be like, well, we don't know what they're going through. Like it was always just natural
and it's
for me
just
to
like
kind of
so
play.
Unexpected for you, knowing that like upbringing you had. Like to me, like right now you're like blowing up the nature nurture argument to be like, this is all nature, because like you would think you're nurture, you'd be the last person to like, you'd be like, let them gossip about these other people because I don't want anyone talking about me.
It's a great, you read What Happened to You by Oprah and I read it and I'm like, I don't know how the frick I got here.
You're like an enigma.
I literally. So it's cool because, you know, in high school, there was an opportunity to go into AP Psych and my go-to classes were like English, I loved writing. I had a blog through college where I just like wrote about my life so my
I could
family
see
could
that.
keep up.
Yeah.
And AP psychology. And I was like, like finally, I was like, I have words to describe all the thoughts and all the things that I had in my head. Sick. And then now I find out, wait, we can go to college for psychology. Like mind blown. I'm like AP psychology, right
Okay.
into year 2 psychology, into communications was a big one. And then I kind of was like, I'm gonna go to social work. That triggered the fuck out of me. I was like, I'm dropping out of school. Didn't do that. And so I kind of was like, hey, there has to be other ways for this. And I think for a lot of us, the way that Instagram was used for a long time was just like quote pages of like,
Yeah.
be
I
kind
remember
to
that.
yourself,
Yeah.
love yourself. And so I kind of started on that. And I remember there was like distinctively maybe a year 4, 5, 6. It was a while ago now. It was right before I started my podcast. And this was what changed my entire life is I read Rachel Hollis's Girl Wash Your Face. Someone gave me a copy of it for some reason. I think they're like, I think you'd really like it, whatever. I don't even remember who gave it to me, but I remember reading it and I actually have something in my journal that says one day I want to be like Rachel Hollis and empower women to like live their best lives or something or have a business to do what she does, which is crazy. I found it the other month and started bawling because that was the
You did
extent that
it.
it touched me where I'm like, I
Yeah.
started a podcast, I did all these things. And I think she was really the epiphany that I had of like, wait, this is a thing. I started going to therapy, started reading, like listening to Oprah. Then I realized podcasts were a thing. Oh shit, I can get like endless downloads of what this is. And
Yeah.
that kind of spiraled into it. And now, so right now I've done like ISTT training, so like intimatic somatic trauma therapy certificate. I haven't done life coaching, which is funny. A lot of people think that I have, but I've done like NLP and things like that.
I was
Life
going to ask
coaching
if
to
you
me,
did
I'm like,
NLP because I figured that you probably did. Yeah.
yeah, I am actually doing Master Prac in May coming up for 2 weeks, right? So
Cool.
I'm really excited for that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I haven't done it. And I've had Kendall, who we were obviously talking about before, our business coach. She's told me like so many, she literally told me a million times, like, I don't know how you didn't do the certification because you already do it anyways. And I'm like, I really need to do it. And I know that like a few of our mutual friends went to a conference for it a couple weeks ago and I couldn't go and I really wanted to go. So it's on my radar as something to do for sure, because I feel like it'll just like solidify kind of what you're saying, like all these things that I already know from the life experience, but be able to put more words to it and be like, oh yeah, this is why this makes sense. Yeah.
When I went through it, was the same thing where they were saying you want to do this for someone else and you're like, wait, this is natural. And I do think that there's just some people, and I think you fall into this category very well, that are just natural born leaders where we understand communication from an innate level. You know, like you don't have some people you have to explain social cues to, which is okay. We all have our strongholds.
You can learn.
But yeah, for some of us, it's just natural of like, oh, okay, they're starting to talk. Maybe I'll fade back. Let me, it's little things like that that some people have to be taught. And so it was so interesting learning NLP and kind of going, oh, that's the reason this thing works. Oh, this is how our brains work, and getting deeper into it, especially from a client perspective, where for me and the work that I do, it's really deepening with our subconscious. And so to even like you kind of ask the question, what do you do? And that's the ultimate question. Because right now when people ask me what I do, I'm like, I don't really think I have a name for it. I hate calling myself a life coach. So I'm like throwing that out. I don't like the cheesy names. And so right now I'm like, we'll go with like leadership coach. But even then, nobody's like, I need a leadership coach, right? So there's all these names you could put on it, but I think the basis is there's a lot of holes in the leadership we have in this present day, whether we're looking at politicians, my parents, right? Other people's parents, teachers, all these different leadership roles where we are taking care of people within our charge, that because of our own holes in our worthiness and our own self-concept, we continuously drop the ball because of our own egos, our projections, our insecurities, and so on and so forth. And I just can't imagine if we had more heart-led leaders, servanthood leaders who don't think that they're in charge of. You're not in charge of people, you're taking care of people. And there's a big difference between being a dictator and a servanthood leader. And I think that's also why I've fallen in love with Jesus so much, because I'm like, he is the epitome of servanthood. He's the epitome of a leader that I'm not serving from the front. I'm in it with you. And I think that's really created this beautiful dynamic for me to say, well, why don't we teach this to people so we can have a better world, a more worthy world where people can act out of a place of love rather than grappling for power or needing to fill their insecurities with money, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the things that you just said, like we have obviously had this conversation and you describing to me like your goals for your business and being able to take this to a place of like working with more corporate companies and like supporting their executive leadership. I shared with you that I think that's so needed. And when I think about like my experiences of not enjoying working for other people, I can look back now and I will say my disclaimer on what I'm about to say is I can only say this now because I did the personal work. And that's the through line of everything we've been saying, right? That's the radical responsibility, the relationship with yourself, understanding that everything in the world is just you in relation to it. Like every job, every like actual person, the way you think about things, like my coach Oliver has taught me to think about it in this context of like everything's relationship. And he too like struggles with the name of his coaching for that reason. Like even when I explain to people what he's done for me, I'm like, it's not therapy. It kind of is. It's sort of not. Like it's really hard to like actually describe it. So I feel you on that. And I'm like, I've been like trying to think of a word for people like yourself because I don't think there's one that just like captures it the right way. And to your point of like, thinking about like the insecurities that people have and how much that actually shows up in the workplace for me with everything I mentioned earlier about like constantly getting this feedback that I was like too young or too opinionated. I can now say that was because of those people's insecurities, but it also doesn't make me better than them. And there was a time in my life when I internalized it to be like, F this, like I'm going to prove them wrong. They're not correct. Like at one point I had a boss not too long ago who told me that my nutrition business was not viable and said it in a way that like literally we were having a conversation and they go, as a friend. So they tried to like couch it and like get out of like CEO boss mode for a second. As a friend, can I just give you the advice that I don't think your nutrition business is going to be successful? Personally, I took that shit and ran with it and was like, let me show you. But that wasn't the energy that I wanted to bring to the rest of my life. It worked like for 2 years and it helped me really grow my platform. And it helped me bring in more clients and like have that like drive to be like, I'm going to prove people wrong. But when I think about somebody who would make a comment like that to me, and then also knowing things about their personal life and like all this other stuff that's kind of unrelated to the workplace to a degree, I now recognize that what they actually needed was like more of the self-development. They needed the correct leadership because the business that we were operating together would have been a completely different experience. And that experience would have then impacted the member, the client, the person who was signing up for the program. And guess what? More businesses would be more successful. And at the end of the day, that's why I boiled down this idea and concept of really good content to energy, to connection, to knowing yourself, because you say it so well. And I don't want to steal your thunder on this, but I wanted to make sure you got this quote in the podcast is like, show me the holes in your business and I'll show you the holes in your entire situation that has nothing to do with work. So let's kind of bring it home with that. Like, where did you come up with that thought? And like, what does that actually mean in actuality?
This is my favorite thing in the world because so I have clients that come to me, oh my goodness, this is, even today, okay, we'll use my post today. People, I ask them, what's your biggest bottleneck in business? They say content.
Yeah.
Okay, but you have the strategy, you have the photos, you have the ideas, you have all these things. So is it actually content or is it the fact that you're too scared to speak your opinion because of what people will think, because you're going to get canceled? Okay, so then this has nothing to do with content at all and everything to do with yourself. And it's so funny because once you start working so intimately on a one-to-one basis with these people, you start seeing the parallels. Oh, so you're also doing this actually in your relationship and it's causing fights too. Oh, you just had to blow it with your friend because you're too scared to speak your truth and just actually set a boundary with her. Oh, okay. Right. And so there's all this foundational basis where people are like, oh, this is showing up in my business. Okay, but that's a symptom, not the root. And that's where it comes back down to, okay, if we want to actually look at becoming better people, it's taking better ownership. That's the level of leadership you need to get to. And when you do that from a root basis, you'll fix all the symptoms. And it's kind of like gut health, right? You can't say, oh, I'm going to take a greens powder that'll fix everything. No. Oh, let me just go on Accutane and it'll fix my acne. Let's get to the root of why it's happening in the first place. And that will help everything that you do. And so that's really the foundational piece, because what I see happening in entrepreneurs or any business owners' businesses usually is happening in their romantic relationships. Usually it's happening also in their relationship to money. There's no coincidence here because they're all parallels of the deeper problem.
Yeah. So well said. I love that. And I am excited to just see you continue to share that because it's such a good perspective shift for people that I think it's freeing. That's why it's a good perspective shift, because the minute you stop judging yourself and realizing that like, hey, like you're not lacking creativity. If one more person tells me that they just don't have ideas for posting, no, here's your problem. Get up away from your phone, get away from your desk, go outside, stop consuming other people's content and just listen to your thoughts. If you think you're lacking creativity, I know what you're lacking. You're forgetting that you have like, what, 60,000 thoughts a day? I think that's the statistic. It's something crazy like that. And you are not listening to even 5% of them. Because if you actually sat with yourself and you just listened and you noticed what was coming up without judging it, you'd realize you're sitting on a gold mine of content ideas that are going to attract the people that are meant to be in your community. And it really can feel like that simple. But again, even the example I'm describing here, you choosing to just go consume other content for quote unquote inspiration. To me, I take that as like, you're still just not trusting yourself. So like the action step that you're taking is to go listen to someone else's podcast, to outsource this because you don't want to be alone with your own thoughts. And I was the queen of that for like 3 years. The energy I was describing before in saying that like, yeah, I built a lot of my business off of this, like, let me prove you wrong kind of energy. Again, it did work until it didn't, because it was leading me to feel really burnt out of like, oh, well, I got to get to this next goal. I got to get to this next goal. And I got burnt out because when I couldn't get to that next goal, I kept thinking I wasn't doing enough. So the story that I ultimately was looking to unpack was, why do I have this belief that I have to do more in order to feel like my level of like satisfaction or self-worthiness? That goes all the way back to like some stories I've been hanging on to since I was like 5 years old.
Absolutely. And it's reinforcing the system too. Like, I think that's such a big thing. Is like, yeah, we can blame our parents for traumatizing us. They're also traumatized. Their parents are also traumatized.
Yeah.
And the system we live in is literally school, grade.
Right.
What grades you get determine how well you do. The more you study, the better you do, right? So it's just like reinforcing our heads of that. And I always laugh so hard when, you know, people and clients come to me and they're like, I get my best ideas in the shower, or I get my best ideas while driving. What that tells me is you do not spend enough time alone without distraction. I'm like, you just fucking outed yourself, because now you're exposed. Now I know where you're at. And it's so funny because most of the time what I get my clients to do, and it's so funny, it's like type A, perfectionist, imposter syndrome. I say, I want you to schedule some alone time. Can you go color for an hour? Like, it's so funny because it's just so foundational, bringing you back down to your childhood roots. All of a sudden, all these problems start disappearing, right? Obviously, it takes work also.
Yes.
But the foundational piece is, okay, just go spend time alone.
Right. And why do the problems start disappearing? Because you already had all of the answers inside of you. So the solutions just come up to the surface. That's what it is. And I really love what you said about like, you know, there's no one to really like blame for any of this because of like the system that we're in. I've had this conversation with my parents so much because I love my mom and she will be the first person to blame herself for something that like didn't go right in my life according to like what she would have hoped for me. And it's taken so many conversations for us to be able to be like, hey, like you didn't do anything to me. Like something that I know that she's kind of like racked her brain over is, why do I even have some of the stories that I do? Because my parents never put pressure on me. Like I just happened to like have, like you were saying before, just certain innate abilities and I ran with them. And so like my mom looks at it and she's trying to analyze like, did I say the wrong thing? Should I have done something differently over here? Was I not supportive? And like, that couldn't be further from the truth. And like, that's why I said at the very beginning of this, like we had such a different upbringing, like completely different upbringing. Right. And so it becomes like, you want to become your own like case study of like, well, why did I come up with some of these things? And if I had to boil it down to like some system, I'd be with you and say that it was probably school. Because I had somebody on my podcast like just 2 weeks ago, by the time we air this episode, who I went to high school with. And in talking about her journey, like through sobriety, she actually connected a lot of the dots back to the town that we grew up in and like what was like socially acceptable and what people were getting praised for. And the more she said that, I was like, oh, this actually does kind of make sense. Like in one token, like some people then leaned on substances. In my like token, I kind of took it to be like, well, I got to be the best at everything because that's going to make me like feel like I get the recognition I deserve. It's like pick your poison, so to speak.
100%. And I think it just like comes back down to what we started the podcast episode with is like we all have grown up in the system and we can use that and blame it and say, this is what it made me. Or we can just claim it. Like Brene Brown says something that's always so profound to me is that we can shame ourselves and get self-destructive. We can blame everybody else and point fingers on why it's happening, or we can just claim it and we can just own it and we can just accept it. And then we can take radical ownership and change what we need to change to get to where we want to go.
Amen. And like the claiming it piece, like it just gives things such less power. Like it just reduces it down to like not having the chokehold that it had on you anymore. And that's huge.
100%. I always tell people like nothing can take your power away.
No.
The politician, the gas prices, the economy, this client doesn't take your power away. You give it away. And that is a choice. And when we center ourselves back down into that, oh shit. Okay, you bet your bottom dollar I'm so much more picky with where I put my energy, what I let take things away, the external factors that dictate how I show up. Because I don't have to give my energy away.
No.
And I can just stand in my power and take my own actions to create the life that I want.
And then you'll actually show up. That's like the through line to me of even what I was talking about before with like the religious aspect of saying like, hey, this is what we need to do to take action at the end of the day. So I absolutely love that. Bean is apparently telling me that like, we gotta go. Yeah, she wants water because her water bowl looks currently empty. So I am going to wrap up the episode here. Thank you so much for coming on today. The last thing I got to ask you, and I mean, I haven't had somebody come on the show for like 2 hours in a while, and I could still keep going. But clearly you have a lot of great things to say. So where can people stay connected with you, and where can we listen to your podcast, all that sort of stuff? We'll put it down in the show notes.
I love this. I just want to say thank you for having me on too. It's been such an honor. You guys can find me at Chelsea Tansey on Instagram, and my podcast name is Built Not Born. Pretty self-explanatory across all platforms. So I'm super grateful and I appreciate you.
Love it. I appreciate you. You are the best. I'm so grateful for you, our connection through WWBA, the decision for us to both get on a flight and go to California when we did and just like randomly start that conversation. So it's really cool. Like the invisible string we were referencing, and podcasting is such a nice way to kind of hang on to that thread. So I know a lot of people will get value from this one. You guys do us the favor. I know I say it every single week, but you got to share this episode if it was beneficial to you in any kind of way. And I couldn't come up with a reason to think that it wasn't. So share it, send it to a friend, put it on your Instagram page, whatever, leave a review, go check out Chelsea's podcast. Please do the exact same over there. I don't say this enough, but it does make a massive difference on our platforms if you actually leave a review. So please do it. You don't even have to like write anything. It takes 0.2 seconds. If you got time to listen to the show, you can totally hit those stars. So go ahead and do us a favor and do that for us. But as always, from wherever you guys are listening from, I appreciate you being here. Chelsea, thank you. And I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and we will catch you on next week's episode. Thanks, Chelsea.